we would love to see your beautiful faces. We're going to also be taking a group session, so we would love to see you there. And yeah, this is really it about housekeeping. Just let's give it one more minute before we start the whole talk. Okay, I think we can get started just because I'm conscious of the time. So first, it's such an honor to have you all part of BLIX family, which is a place where all equal and we have a common passion for inclusion and diversity. I'm really, really excited to see you all becoming leaders of the future through the several things that we offer you, which is our bite-sized mentorship with senior leaders, our leadership talk, and our knowledge exchange. And this is actually the second knowledge exchange talk that we're having for you. So let me just make sure that the slides are working. Can we change the slides, please? Yeah. So sorry for that. So as I was saying, that through the different things that we offer you is through our business bites, leadership lessons, inclusive leadership, and our knowledge exchange session. So this is our second knowledge exchange session that we have for you. And I would be really honored to introduce you just some of our mentors. Do feel free to check them out and know more about their background through our website, where our incredible team have linked it below in the chat box. And last but not least, I would love to thank our incredible leaders that really made this happen. And as you already might know, that we decided to schedule Carl's talk on inclusive leadership at a later date. So make sure to keep an eye on that. And for today, our talk, which is the second one, around the topic that we really all need to be aware of, since we live in an increasingly machine-driven world where AI calls the shots. And if we don't really address these problems of racial biases that are creeping into AI algorithm, then it will keep continuing to perpetuate the imbalances that already exist in today's society. So I'm thrilled to introduce you Mike Bugembe, which is also one of our mentors at BLIX. So now I will be handing it to you, Mike.
Thank you for that intro. As we are pressed for time, I'm actually going to jump right into the slides, if that's okay, and I'll give a bit more intro about myself. Please shout if you are not able to see them. I'm just getting onto them right now. Right. From my screen, it looks like you can see the slides. Are you all able to see the title slide? If someone wouldn't mind unmuting and just letting me know.
Yep.
Yes.
Great. All right, so let's kick off. So apologies for, and it might have been my mistake to give the grammatical error earlier when I said racial bias on artificial intelligence. It's actually in the world of artificial intelligence that I want to talk to you about. I will introduce myself really quickly. For those that don't know me, I'm an author, a speaker, an advisor, in generally passionate about all things tech, but more specifically in the world of data and analytics. And I run a training and strategy consultancy in the world of data, analytics, and AI. Okay, so to jump straight into this, we're talking about racial bias in artificial intelligence. When we think of the term artificial intelligence, we often get pictures like this that have been presented to us from Hollywood. But at least in my space, when we start thinking of the words data science, artificial intelligence, algorithms, we actually start thinking of the big three, or the big four, I should add. I put these slides together very recently. I think Netflix should sit in there as well. Also known as the four horsemen of the internet. So, and the trouble with these organizations is that they sort of give off this idea that artificial intelligence is limited to the large tech West Coast organizations in the US. So As I'm a big fan of the subject, I thought I will kick off by just talking a little bit about some other uses of artificial intelligence, just to get a feel of other places in which it plays a role and why this particular topic is therefore important across the board. So two of my favorite examples, one is for any sports fans out there, if you've heard of a company called Catapult, they use algorithms to try and predict increase the longevity of sports players in their respective teams. So the teams that tend to win their respective leagues use Catapult because they're able to predict the onset of injury. And also as a result of that, they can prescribe the right methods of training, the right activities to prolong the life of a player during the season. And so the teams that are able to keep their best players available for the entire season are more likely to win their respective leagues. And Catapult uses a lot of AI and data science for that. Into something a bit more social, a very strong example that I love to use is one called the Black Dog Institute. And what they do is they've been able to use predictive algorithms to help predict the onset of mental illness and depression. It was used by DARPA, I believe, primarily for soldiers that are returning from war. And they found that those soldiers typically had a high propensity to suffer from mental illness and correspondingly commit suicide. And by being able to predict the likelihood of this, what they could do was intervene early rather than wait for the mental illness to take place. It had a huge amount of benefits, including saving lives, but also from a cost perspective, it was significantly more effective to be able to intervene rather than and do sort of preventative treatment rather than deal with it afterwards. Two other examples that me personally I've been involved in. Some of you may have seen a documentary on the BBC about sex being swapped for grades. So recently I've been for grades with at university students, where lecturers were approaching young girls or even vice versa, and basically offering them the marks that they wanted in exchange for sexual favors. I was approached by an organization. It was still in conversations, but through some initial analysis, we found that AI can play a significant role in reducing these occurrences. So I'm actually quite excited by that. And at the same time, I was approached by another organization who brought to my attention something that I really wasn't aware of children that are excluded from school. Firstly, I didn't know how many children were affected by that. And secondly, I wasn't aware of the corresponding impact. So when a child has been excluded or expelled from so many schools, and this is happening to children that are as young as 6 years old, their chances or their likelihood of becoming a criminal and ending up in the criminal justice system, they just go through the roof, right? So their chances of committing suicide and ending up as a criminal just because of being excluded from school at a very young age go through the roof. So we've been talking about how we can create some predictive algorithms to do some really amazing things in there. Like, for example, that can predict if Charlie's going to come into class and throw the chair at the teacher. And in that case, do some preventative measures rather than Charlie actually doing that and then eventually getting expelled. But actually what it does is allows the teacher to have a different approach to dealing with the student on that particular day and reduce the number of school exclusions that are taking place. It's a problem that I didn't know was so widespread and had such a big life impact. But anyway, we're here to talk about some of the imbalances that exist in society. More specifically, I'll be talking to you about race and also gender equality, that artificial intelligence is sadly, rather than hiding or avoiding or addressing, it's actually perpetuating. This isn't a new problem for many of us, but for me, it was really brought to the attention by my children in 2019. Sorry, the years have now become a little blurry with everything that's been going on. But in 2019, it was brought to my attention to a different level by my children. So I have three amazing boys full of energy. They love robots, they love AI. But one of them in particular, the middle one, has taken more after me and has a really strange passion for PowerPoint. And he was creating a presentation about families. And more specifically, he had just had a new cousin. My sister had given birth. And he was putting together a presentation that talks about his family and a new addition to the family. But he came to me and said, Dad, quite humorously, he said, Google doesn't know that cute babies also look like Sankara, meaning his cousin. I was like, what do you mean? He said, well, I Googled cute baby, and this is what I got. Now, I said, this is new. This isn't new. Actually, you know what? It wouldn't be a bad exercise if you took some time right now and perhaps jumped onto your browser and typed in, or another window and typed in cute baby and see if you got the same results. But it was fascinating because what Caleb, my son, had done at that particular point is he had personalized the algorithm, and he said Google doesn't know as if it was an individual, that a cute baby could look like Sankara. And for an 8-year-old to pick that up, that was quite important for me, and it was quite a high impact. So we dug around a little bit. Now, as I said, this isn't new. Many of you will know about these issues, and they've been written about in these amazing books. I would urge you to look at them. They are absolutely fantastic if you can pick up a copy, but they really give you some insight into the impact of this. So, for example, in 2014, if you typed the word black girl into Google, all the results that came back were porn related. You know, and again, you could sort of use the same anecdote that is what, was it public opinion, or it's what Google understood by that. But these books go into a lot of detail about the impact of some of those such search results, and what it does on people's perceptions, and perhaps even the perpetuation of stereotypes. But this was all the way in 2014. These books were written in 2014 is what I'm effectively saying, and there have been some great TED Talks on the subject. We're in 2020. And the problem is still here. And this is what's scary for me, is that the problem is not just persisting, it is in production. It's in production right now. It's in the algorithms have been released, and they are being actively used in many parts of the world. So early this year, there was some very interesting research that was looking at facial recognition algorithms, and they tested over 200 ones that are currently being used by the police. Right. And what they found was every single one of those algorithms had a really, really strong bias in that they were very likely to find false positives for African Americans. Essentially saying that if it took a picture or saw you in a video, there was a high chance that it would find a match in the database. Basically perpetuating that old adage that we all look alike. Right, so if you remember, there was a time a reporter had very clearly confused Samuel L. Jackson for Lawrence Fishburne, and we see that in the newspapers today. But the fact that an algorithm used to detect whether you are a criminal or not has a very high probability to say that you are is pretty scary, and the fact that this is out there in production. And the other places where we can see these algorithms being used at the moment, I've already mentioned the police, but they're using them to determine whether you get medical care. There's predictive policing to understand where they deploy more of their resources, particularly during limited times. School admissions, job applications, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. Housing, decisions on healthcare provision. This stuff is absolutely everywhere, and it is in production, which means we have biased systems that are out there already. And for an underrepresented portion of our society, primarily people of color and women, these machines are more likely to have a negative bias to them. And these are life-impacting decisions that these machines come up with. So I was talking to someone recently, and the reason why I'm going to add the next slide was because they said, oh, but this is more of a future problem, isn't it? We have a problem in the way that we look at the way artificial intelligence is getting into many of our systems. I think by its very nature, artificial intelligence is designed to be subtle so that we can't see it. And the reason for that is more people are more likely to interact with what they believe to be a human than a machine. But these algorithms are everywhere, and they are growing significantly fast. And to give you an indication of the rate of growth, in 2014, Wired magazine released this article where they had met with a whole bunch of very, very reputable people in the space to ask them, when do they think that a computer will be able to beat a human being at the game of Go? Almost unanimously, or even if you take the groupthink average, the number that was proposed was it'll take in excess of 10 years. So in 2014, we thought it'll take in excess of 10 years. But to show you how exponential this technology is, in 2016, only 2 years later, Lee Sedol was beaten by AlphaGo, which was created by Google. There's a great Netflix documentary on that. I do recommend you watch it. It's Netflix have a great way of making things like really, really interesting and really tense. But just to extend that idea that this is continuing, and it is continuing quicker. If you think of COVID, COVID has created the conditions right now where we're operating in areas that we can't touch. We have to work from home. Many of our habits are now far more digital in order for us to maintain the required social distancing constraints. And companies still need to produce. So if you think, I was mentioned in a call that I was with a few individuals on this call actually last week, where we talked about robots that are being able to stock shelves by people who are doing this from home using VR technology. So very, very interesting things. So look, all of this presents us a real challenge that we've got biased machines out there, and we've got to try and understand why is this so much of a challenge. And an example that I like to use when trying to indicate the seriousness of this situation is when I refer to a social scientist called Stanley Milgram. Many of you might have been aware of some of his experiments. He's a professor from around the 60s and 70s, and he did some fascinating studies around, he was fascinated primarily with how people respond to blind obedience towards authority. And two examples that I've put there just to jog my memory is, consider the idea that you can explore settings in which you would allow yourself to do things that in other settings you wouldn't. So the idea that you would let somebody put a raw blade to your throat, or in another scenario where you would let somebody bring a drill into your mouth. In fact, a more recent experiment that many of you might know of is the follow the leader jaywalking example, where they were trying to understand how many people would cross the road when the sign said do not cross. So how many people would be willing to walk into traffic based on someone taking the first move, and depending on what that person is. So the experiment in that particular time found significant differences between somebody wearing a suit and somebody wearing a t-shirt and a hoodie. And what all of these things have in common is that it's authority, right? There are different signals that we give off as human beings to sort of demonstrate authority. So the suit, the lab coat, and the barbershop all suddenly put us in a position of blind obedience. This is the biggest challenge that we have in the world of artificial intelligence. It has become in itself the ultimate authority. There are many instances that when the computer says no, we just agree and we just listen. And this is, for me personally, one of the more scary aspects of it. That if computer says no, we fall into blind obedience. And it has become, in that Stanley Milgram experiment, the ultimate authority. So my son Caleb asked me, why does this happen? And I think in that discovery, I think it was useful for me to share also here. And I will use the example that I gave him. I said, artificial intelligence is a process of machine learning, or it's based on a process of machine learning. And to understand how machines learn, you have to understand how people learn. We learn through experiences that we go through around us. You know, when we do something, we get told that it's right or that it's wrong. Or we do something and we realize the success or the failure of what we've done, and then we're able to make the corresponding decisions afterwards. I said to him that for machines, that experience is coded within databases. And that there is the problem. A large portion of the world haven't had their experiences coded in the databases. And therefore, the machine itself is learning from biased data. This also is an argument that I used for somebody one time who said, how can ones and zeros be racist? And the truth is, with the fact that we don't appear in those data sets is a really good reason as to why the machine therefore can't create the true associations that it should do. Take two examples. On the left, that gentleman had his passport picture rejected and the computer gave out the reason, and it says because the subject's eyes were closed. And I think on further investigation, they can see that that particular algorithm wasn't trained on many people who look like this gentleman. There's also the example on the right where I'm sure you're aware of algorithms that were developed to increase diversity in hiring. And in this particular instance, I think there was one that was used for to see if they could increase the number of developers, technical developers in their organization. And they found very quickly that that algorithm was essentially filtering out anybody who had the word woman or could be identified as a woman from their CV. And the reason why it did that is because the historical data, i.e. the people that they used to hire typically in that organization, were all white male with dark hair listening to death metal, right? So in an approach to try and understand, well, then how do we fix it? You know, and Caleb continued, my son continued to inquire about this further. I got this picture because he is the one that sort of reads in the most awkward places. You find him all over the place in the house randomly reading. But I started to talk to him about John McCarthy, the gentleman on the left, whose vision was that he believed that we could teach machines in the same way that we teach children. And so when I said this was brought to my attention by my children, Caleb then told me, then if you can teach a child not to be racist, surely then you can teach a machine not to be racist. And this is an approach that I haven't seen too much of. So I jumped into a whole bunch of research, and fortunately a lot of the work has already been done for us. There's vast quantities of research around how children get socialized and how you can either teach children to not be racist or them to exhibit some of those characteristics. So I'll three of them very quickly and how they can be applied to the world of machine learning and data science. So the very first one was a fantastic experiment actually around seeing color. The experiment essentially showed that parents who were trying to teach their children about equality by never using color and saying, you should treat everybody the same, everybody's equal, and all of those sort of things, essentially created a vacuum. There are some parents who teach their children a colorblind approach, and that creates a vacuum around the differences, the color and so forth. And this vacuum gets filled by societal biases. What's really interesting is that you can see this in the world of artificial intelligence and machines too. A tool called Compass, which is for me one of the scariest tools there. I think what had happened was the US justice system was reviled for its racist bias, and they turned to technology to try and solve that. And they used a tool called Compass. Unfortunately, Compass basically was more than likely to, or twice as likely to give longer sentences to Black defendants. And what was interesting about Compass is they deliberately said, oh, we've taken the variables of color out of the data. And for me, this is really interesting because in my experience, actually, when you shouldn't hide those variables because that is an important signal about those individuals. Or more importantly, when you take those out, there are other variables and signals that sort of try and what we call multicollinearity, essentially one variable explaining another variable. And so the first thing we need to do is make sure that we include that variable because it also helps us when we're looking at the data sets to make sure that the data sets are more evenly spread. So let's see color in the same way that we teach children to see color. The next one, another experiment was talking about the fact that kids are immersed in negative stereotypes, perpetuated by the media and also culture. To counteract that, they found that parents who expose their kids through, let's say, stories, book, and film to some really positive counter-stereotypical images of people of different racial backgrounds, found that they exhibited less bias and less racism. So really simple examples like looking from left to right, Garrett Morgan, who we can thank for the creation of the traffic light system, doesn't appear in any of our history books, or Lewis Latimer, who was responsible for the carbon filament in Thomas Edison's lamp and is the reason why the lights actually work. Things like that don't appear in the history books, and in the world of machine learning and data, we need to make sure we look at the data sets to make sure that we appear in the data sets. The societal and biases that have, or systematic and biases that have existed are typically the reason why we don't appear in very many data sets. So actually there's ways that you can improve data sets, that you can use what we call adversarial networks to try and create a more representative data set of society, or what society could be. The third excuse me, example that I'll give is they found that children's racial attitudes were tied up to the racial makeup of their parents' social network. So those who had more Black friends or more friends of people of color, cross-race friendships, if you like, had less bias, those children, than those who didn't have those cross-race friendships. And the idea is that when you have such friendships, you incorporate your friends' struggles, motivations, thoughts into your own self-concept. And the idea is then, from the world of machine learning, is you want a mix of diverse people in the room as well. And I got a great example, which I learned about in March this year. And some of you may have heard about it. It's called the Somalian shop food stamp scandal. Essentially, an algorithm detected that there were 3 shops, I believe in the DC or in the Washington area, 3 shops that were flagged as using food stamps illegally, primarily because the spend was, there was a large amount of spend in a very short period of time. And they were saying that it would be too quick to put all those things through the register, so therefore it's fraudulent. And they shut down the shops. This caused a major issue because actually what they didn't understand, and what that algorithm didn't understand, was the shopping habits of that particular community. So that particular community had a lot of people who didn't speak English. They tended to order their food significantly in advance, and would send one person who would come as a representative to collect the food for many families, and therefore large transactions which had been done very quickly prior, and then just put through the system once the food stamps were there. But they didn't understand, let's just say, the shopping behavior of those people. Now, if they had somebody in the room who understood that, someone from that part of the world, they would be able to have given some comment to that particular issue as well. I personally have had experience of this when I was at Just Giving, and we had an algorithm that could predict how much you were likely to raise for charity, and what pictures could sort of inspire your donor base to donate more. And the algorithm said bicycles. Always use a picture of bicycles. And because we had the domain expertise, we were able to say, well, the only reason the algorithm is saying that is that the pages with the most donations tend to have bicycles on them, because they are fundraising pages raised by middle-aged men who cycle, and they tend to be quite wealthy and have some large networks. And because we knew that, we could control for that variable and make sure that we got a better understanding of what that was. But this is the area that I like to focus in most. It's how do we get more underrepresented people, so we're talking about women, we're talking about people of color, into the world of data. And that's what got me to start creating Lens AI, where my aim is, I believe that we can help everybody see and understand data. And really what I'm trying to do is get people to read, to work with, and to be able to reason with data. But I'm looking at this slightly differently. The way I look at this is, I believe, and this all came about from a dinner that I had with Gary Kasparov in 2018, where he asked the question, if I had worked with a computer, would I have played the perfect game, made the best decisions, and beaten all the competition? And very quickly after that, I was on this because I'm passionate about the world of behavioral economics, and how we join that with machine learning. And so at Lens, what we're beginning to focus on is a process that I'm calling Becoming Bionic, which is a book that I'll also be releasing next year. It's I said after my first book, I would never write another book, but I find myself doing that again, to the unhappiness of my wife. But Becoming Bionic really is looking at all of us to understand that each of us as individuals have a superpower. We have something that we are absolutely fantastic at. Let's call it marketing, finance, or something. But we can be even better if we were to augment that skill with data. So essentially, I'm playing on the idea of man and machine fusing together. And just to give you an indication of what that sort of looks like, what I'm talking about, combining human intuition and machine calculation, human strategy and machine tactics, human experience and machine memory. And I believe that rather than us wrestling against the machine, where we can take the best of man and fuse it together with the best that the machine offers, we create a much more superior approach or method of operation that allows us to make significantly better decisions and will hopefully address some of the biases that we have been dealing with right now, and also will allow more people to be part of that conversation. So that is the end of my slides. I shall stop sharing now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. That was great. Just a question here. So you talked a lot about the biases in these algorithms and the importance of eliminating this bias. I guess some of it's conscious, some of it's unconscious bias as well. And sadly, it's a reflection of society. So there is bias in society, and the argument could be that this AI is very good because it reflects the biases that exist in society. How sad that that is. Well, what do you think companies can do in order to eliminate those biases so that AI is a better inclusive citizen than what we currently have today?
I think, let me jump on a couple of points that you mentioned. I love what you said there, that it's a reflection of society. And I think it's a great argument for, if anyone had a doubt that there are systematic issues in society, just have a look at artificial intelligence, right? You know, because it's very clearly just representing those systematic issues that we have. What can companies do? I think, you know, when you think about things in terms of, you've got a choice. You think about it in terms of equality, right? That everybody is the same and treated the same. Or potentially you think about it in terms of equity, in that you may have to bring certain people up to another level, or invest more in certain individuals so that we can begin to truly play on an equal playing field. So the STEM subjects, which very sadly is horribly underrepresented by both women and people of color, are things that I think, you know, for example, what you're doing with BLIX, to try and showcase some more people like me, if you like, in this space. Encourage more children to jump into that space. We do need more people working in the world of data and in the world of algorithms, number one. Number two, I would encourage everybody, you know, we've gone through, I'm showing my age now, there was a time when not everybody had computers in their office, and everyone needed to learn how to type. It just became natural. And I don't think you can get a job today if you don't know how to type or work on a computer. And very quickly, because we're moving into an increasingly machine-driven world, we've all got to learn the language of data. And sadly, in my world, we tend to make that world very murky. We use Greek symbols where English will suffice. And in all honesty, data is accessible. If you are able to reason, then you will be able to work with data. So I think we need to remove those barriers to getting people into the world of STEM, everybody into the world of STEM. And data will become a second language that we all need to learn.
Mike, it's Paul. I love the presentation. And as you know, I work in the industry that creates probably some of the challenges that we face. And I think that the observation more than the question is, I guess the intellectual arrogance of the technology industry you know, overcomes the need to be much more curious about why are we doing something. And you know, we're on a race to the top, I suppose, of what technology can do. And it's almost like we fell in love with the idea that we can do it because we can, and so we do, and therefore we don't give it enough time to be curious about why we're doing it in the first place. And you know, as you mentioned, facial recognition, in the company I work for, we halted investments in that earlier on this year. But actually, when you look under the hood, there's a lot of questions that we never really asked ourselves, because we probably intellectually arrogantly thought, well, that's okay. And I think, you know, what's learning, and your presentation has been brilliant, is to challenge ourselves much more, and to put back the curiosity that's been stripped out of us as we've gone from, you know, been a child to university to work. It slowly gets stripped away because we conform. Yeah. And when we conform, we're not curious, and when we're not curious, we, as you quite rightly said, we go along with what everyone else is saying, and that's a dangerous thing when you talk about AI. So it's more of an observation than a question.
But I'll add to that. The groupthink, I think you were totally right on that, and the intellectual arrogance. So the scary thing is there is no auditing for bias at the moment in any of these algorithms. And what's even worse is, if there are any data scientists here, they'll know this, the way we measure the success or the accuracy of an algorithm, we use accuracy, of course, but then we also use other things called precision and recall. There is no measure that we use to check whether our data is just a poor representation of society. We take a data set, we do some checks to see if there's what we call skews and outliers and those sort of things. And then we train the machine on that data set. But we don't, as a measure of success, say, is this biased or not? Mm-hmm. So we don't actually care at the moment. And I think that's one of the things that need to change, even in our methodology of writing algorithms, that, you know, one of the success factors should be, is this biased or not?
Perfect. So for everyone, feel free to unmute yourself if you got any questions for Mike, or if your mic is not working for whatever reason, please feel free to drop your message or your question to the chat box, and I will read it out loud. So, yeah.
Great.
Hi, Mike. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
You were talking about earlier about having data sets which are inherent, I'd say they have some kind of inherent bias in them. Do you think this will continue to be a problem that we can work? Do you think it'll be a case that we can get to a point where this is no longer the case? Or do you think that this is just something that we need to work with and be aware of until ad infinitum?
Yeah, so again, we have that thing where because there's no regulation, there is no ISO standard or any of those sort of things that needs to be met. There doesn't seem to be any sort of pressure on an organization when they're building these algorithms. And Paul used a phrase that I think is absolutely key. It's a race to the top. So they're in a hurry. And this is just, they're not going to be punished for it. There's no financial incentive to not do it. So it doesn't become something that's top of their priority list at the moment. At some point, I believe the impact will become even more significant, right? But I do think, hopefully, as a society, we get, particularly after this year, we get to the point where the organization that is a bit more socially conscious is the one that us as consumers will continue to support. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Have we got any more? I have a question. Did anybody type in cute baby in their phone or something? And did anyone get like a mixed set of results, or I'm just intrigued?
Yes, I did.
Okay, brilliant. Good. That's one out of you. That's good. It's good to know.
Perfect. I do have a question, Mike. So, yeah. what was your biggest learning in leadership so far throughout your career in AI and tech? What is the most thing that you've learned as a leader?
Oh, okay. Just try and remember, make sure I've understood the question. What was the biggest thing that I've learned as a leader?
Yeah, in leadership so far. So you have quite good experience. So what would you say you're learning?
Well, okay, for me, it's and a lot of people talk about this, the ability to have situational leadership. Right? That it's not one group style to be able to address any sort of situation. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if that. Were you able to hear me? Sorry. Yeah.
Not really.
Okay.
But yeah.
Was that my mic? I'm so sorry if it was. I'll try that again. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Brilliant. So I think in response to your question was situational leadership, in that we can't use one, and I think I used the term brute force approach to solve every single problem. It's understanding the situation and what we're supposed to do at hand. And that comes, and that is so clear with regards to machine learning, where we tend to think there is a set of steps and a process, but actually we've got so many models for so many different situations that will give a much more optimal result. Sometimes people favor over complexity, when, if I'm honest with you, an average will give you a better result, right? So a mean and a median will give you a significantly better result than a really complex regression algorithm. So,
Interesting.
Mike?
yes.
Is it possible to build a machine learning algorithm that will audit other algorithms?
That's a great question, Neil. I think that was just your voice. I couldn't see you. So is that you, Neil?
It is me.
Yeah. I think it's possible. Yes. It is also the scariest prospect in the world after what I've just shared, in that most of the algorithms are already biased. So imagine a biased algorithm auditing auditing all other algorithms. That is also a really scary prospect. I think the key thing for me is, right now, we have to accept that there are areas in which the algorithm can't make the optimal decision. There are areas in which the human being is still far more superior. And I'll give you another quick example. Machines are better at us at seeing, better than us at seeing. They're better than us at hearing. Voice to, if you want voice to text translation is a good example. There's been a test in Germany looking at car signs, and the machine wins every time in any sort of situation. So better than us at seeing and hearing. We're now teaching machines how to taste, right? So we're coding taste and we're coding smell. So essentially we're replicating the 5 senses, and someone could easily say then the machine's better than the human. But there are actually many instances where scientists have now found that perhaps we have more than 5 senses, we have potentially 20, right? And a quick example is, if you guys would be willing to indulge me, if you all close your eyes and take your index finger and try and touch your nose. Okay, and if you missed, I would suggest this is a good time to consider a trip to the GP. But if you were able to get it, that is not one of the 5 senses that we are all taught. That is a completely different sense, and I can't even remember the name. But it's that idea that our body knows the geo position of every part of many different things, without sight, without sound, without any of those sort of things. You can't get at the moment a computer to do that, right? You'd have to give it the geolocation stamp and point of each of those aspects in order for it to do it. You can't get a computer to do that. There's other senses where, my wife is pretty good at this one, where she can look at someone and just think they're the bad guy, right? Or things like that. And there's just something in there that has jumped into her, and she's able, so that gut instinct. We haven't been able to teach a machine any of those things just yet, And so our intuition with all those signals and the data that we're processing is still superior, but it is also weak in many areas, right? So it's finding the areas in which we're weak, get the machine to play ball there, and then finding the areas in which the machine is weak, and then we can take over in that aspect.
Can I also just ask about the, I did the test, the search for the cute baby thing, and pretty shocked at what I saw. So you talked about like diversity, having other people in the room, but with a lot of tech companies, do you not also think that they need to actually go out to other areas of the world? I mean, one of the things is where their research centers are based. So yes, you have to have diversity in terms of who you have in Silicon Valley or wherever, London or whatever, but also going out to other parts of the world, because obviously in a few years' time, the majority of people who are non-Western are going to grow. It's going to grow exponentially, So it's in terms of markets, in terms of getting business and so on, but also diversity has to be put out into other parts of the world.
You're totally right. You're totally right. I think, and I'll give you a quick example or anecdote that I've had to deal with in the past. And that was looking at different cultures. You have some cultures that, for example, as you were talking, I remember this, some that are culturally inclusive, right? And then you have those that are some culturally exclusive, and I think that's the term. So the example that we encountered was, let's say an area like Japan, where, and you have on your tech platform the feature that X amount of people have also done this, right? So in a culturally inclusive society, this increases the probability of you taking that action, right? But that doesn't work everywhere, because in one where it is very individualistic society, where everyone is striving to be different, like Shoreditch, right? Then that particular piece of tech wouldn't work, So it would have to be something like be the first or something like that. So AI, tech, all of these tech companies, in order for them to succeed in whatever it is that they're doing, they do absolutely have to look at all the different cultures around the world. And that's not just about having that person in the room. It's about really exploring the differences in people. So yeah, I think that's a great point, Malcolm.
Perfect. We actually have a few questions on the chat box. So Edima, please correct me if I'm pronouncing it wrong. So the question was, do you think companies should be asked by government to share their diversity and inclusion data?
I think so, and this perhaps goes beyond. I think they should. I think, you know, as right now, and I'm not too sure if this is in GDPR because I don't particularly know that element of it. But it would be, there should be no shame for companies to be able to share how their algorithm is being trained, right? I think we should be honest and be able to say this is a sample of the training data that we use. And it'll be very clear in that whether it is nationally representative, socially representative, or neither, right? You know, so I do think, for me, me personally, the answer for that would be yes, absolutely. What have they got to hide?
Great, thank you so much. So far, we don't have any more questions, but if I missed any, please do feel free to correct me. In the meantime, just because we believe that we will really care about your key takeaways from this session, I would love to share with you guys. So one of the incredible team now will share with you questions that it's just two simple, straightforward questions. We would love you to go to Menti. So yeah, Maria, feel free to share it, and then would love to hear your key takeaways from today's session. Can you everyone see the slide? Perfect. So just feel free to any laptop or any phone beside you to go to www.menti.com and use the code on the slide. I will also type it down in case you're unable to see it for whatever reason. And sign in that code, and yeah. Let's give it 2 minutes and then we can wrap things up. Ready? Amazing, it's coming. So yeah, because I'm quite conscious about the time as well. So I can see a lot really learned about the limitations that AI faces and how we humans can really drive this change. So thank you so much, Mike, for being an open eye to everyone in this call and for really, really stepping out and making us aware of things that we can change and we can implement to make the world a better place. So for everyone, also, please do feel free to share your key takeaways or to share any thoughts you had about this talk using our hashtag BLIX Network. as well as tag us in any of our social media platforms that my incredible team will share with you. Would love to hear from you, and make sure you sign up as a member in order to maximize all the opportunities that we got for you. And before I end up and wrap up things, I would love to let you know all that we have in 2 weeks' time a talk by Rainy Carroll, who is an MBE. So be the first to sign up to the exclusive event using the link that we have for you in the chat box. What the talk will be about is a surprise. So keep an eye on our social media just for you to make sure you don't miss it out. And if you got any question, feel free to also reach to myself and the rest of the team. And thank you all for coming. And thank you, Mike, for that topic. It was really an eye-opening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Can we take a screenshot before we go? Just for...
Oh, yeah, the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. My bad. Thank you.
If everyone could put on their cameras, that would be great for us to see your faces. Thank you.
Everyone is leaving. Yeah. My bad. Done? So once this is done, can you just, sum it up just for us to know when to stop smiling? Okay, good.
So am I allowed a quick question, please?
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, that's to Mr. Bugembe. I sort of wrote on the chat, what is your take on the widespread use of the acronym BAMES? Black Asian minority ethnics. Because I hear that I'm asking this from the point of view that I've heard a lot of people using that term to associate also Black people, and so it's like an umbrella term has become. But there's the argument, sorry, of making the case that actually the Black community is in and of itself a group of people with their issues, and then there is the rest. I hope I'm making sense here.
Yeah, you are. I think, and again, this is up for a day. I'll share debate. I'll share my opinion. I think for me, the difficulty with the catch-all behaves very much like a summarized data set, right? In that you then don't capture those intricacies or cultural differences that exist between all of those populations that are captured under BAME. BAME essentially means non-white, but there is so much more than just one group called white and another group called non-white. So that's my perspective in where the term becomes difficult, because culturally we're all very different culturally. Even in Africa, where I come from, my wife's from Ethiopia, I'm from Uganda. It's two completely different cultures, but we're only 2 hours away by airplane. But they're fundamentally different cultures. So it's not my favorite term. It's also where a lot of the stats are both hidden and captured. So it's difficult to use. But that's my opinion. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I'm only asking because I've been recently part of a report on BAMES. I'm part of this institute called the British Computing Society, and I've been been president of it. So I've been taking a bit of a sample to sort of, I guess, get a picture of what are the young up and coming IT professionals that are Black and are of African descent or are from the diaspora. And I happen to be from the diaspora. And so I found it quite disturbing, not gonna lie, that I was part of a larger group when like personally, I feel like I belong to a more specific group of people, which is that of, diaspora and people born in Europe and having also different, associating themselves with culturally the two places, for instance. So they have a different worldview, and also may have a blend of cultures in that people these days may find themselves identifying with. I've at least met a lot of people that are cross cultures in terms of their the awareness because they live in different countries like that. So I think it's important to also include that within data research. Just my opinion on that. Thank you anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you, and feel free, Andy, to book your mentoring session with Mike. You will have more chance to speak and share your thoughts with him. So, and that's also for everyone. So, I'm aware that I ran out of time. So, enjoy the rest of your Friday. Actually, take care of yourself, and I will see you in 2 weeks' time. Take care, everyone.
You all.
Bye. Bye. Mm.